Hello, welcome to the channel Why Stories. Enjoy watching.
The filthy homeless woman was taken around the corner of the maternity hospital and left there in labor, and when her husband suddenly appeared, everyone was stunned. Have they lost their minds, bringing such filth here? Leonardo Ramirez, the manager of maternity hospital number 13, grimaced and spat on the ground, reinforcing his disdain for what had happened with his words. What happened was that at the end of his shift, another expectant mother had been brought in. Her enormous belly, as if it were carrying at least triplets, bulged over the stretched-out figure of the woman like an ugly mound, covered with torn, filthy rags stained with all sorts of grime. It was hard to estimate this woman's age at a glance. She could have been anywhere from 30 to 50. Judging by her blurred, swollen features, she was one of those future mothers who completely ignored doctors' recommendations for a healthy lifestyle. The sharp, acrid stench emanating from her made Laura Romero, the young nurse, cough from a wave of nausea. "I'm sorry, Leonardo," Laura squeaked. "They brought her and left immediately. They only said that a call came from a dump that some homeless people had fought, and when they arrived, there was no one there, just her lying there. They said she didn't say a word about herself. They searched her pockets for documents, but—" "Shut up!" Leonardo growled at his subordinate. "Always they. It's clear enough, I'm having a bad day." The manager grimaced darkly. The paramedics had simply done their job. They responded to the call, found a person in need of medical attention, and took them to the nearest, suitable hospital. They called for someone from the staff, and that someone turned out to be Laura. Then, with the help of the nurse, they dumped the unidentified, groaning, babbling body onto a stretcher in the emergency room and left. And now, what was to be done with this mess? Theoretically, the mess should have been placed in a ward, cleaned up a bit, quickly examined, and most likely moved to the delivery room. But Leonardo Ramirez did not like this arrangement at all. There were 3 reasons for this. First, Leonardo could not stand the homeless, alcoholics, and other antisocial elements, and second and third, well, these reasons repeated and magnified the first one. "No," the man shook his head, "this won't be allowed in my hospital. You take her by the arms, I'll take the legs in." "What do you mean, by the arms and legs?" Laura widened her eyes. I said I won't let this ruin the whole picture here," Leonardo explained slowly and with an intonation suggesting it was dangerous to disagree with him. "But, how can this be?" Laura clutched her heart because, being young and naturally impressionable, she was deeply affected. "She's in labor. Look for yourself." "I don't care." Leonardo literally grabbed the nurse by the edges of her coat, pulled her close, and snarled into her pretty face. "Do you think I want an infection spreading all over the hospital because of her? Or for her to attack other mothers in a delirium? Or for her to die here, and then I have to deal with the problems?" I said, "No, we're taking her out. We'll say later that we admitted her, but she refused and left on her own. Clear? She left on her own, and it's her fault. That's it, take her." Leonardo Ramirez, Laura was afraid of the manager, like many other staff members of maternity hospital number 13, but still struggled against such heartlessness. "How can you? She's a living person." "I'll fire you," Ramirez smiled, or rather, bared his teeth. "You won't get a job even as a cleaner in any clinic. What, do you want to be the one to take the blame? I'll make sure of it, I'll show you. And medicine. I won't be getting any more medicine for your mommy." He suddenly squinted ominously. "How long do you think she'll last without it?" Laura froze. She was a brave girl and stood for justice and kindness, but the last threat hit its mark. "No," the nurse whispered in a colorless voice. "Please, I'll do it. I'll do everything you say." "That's a good girl," Ramirez released her. "Let's get her out quickly before there are more eyes. It's good that the autumn turned out to be surprisingly warm, and at least the poor woman isn't at risk of catching a cold," Laura thought as she helped her boss drag the semi-conscious body of the homeless woman outside, groaning under the weight. Yes, the girl's mind added, it's certainly good that the autumn is warm, because otherwise it's perfectly safe, natural, and even beneficial for a laboring woman to lie unattended around the corner of the maternity hospital on a pile of fallen leaves. Just like a bed, so to speak. After all, women used to give birth in fields, and they managed, somehow survived. It seems. Laura had read and heard something like that. I'm just a monster, the girl thought, looking back at the poor woman, who was now lying, arms and legs spread out, like a giant insect turned on its back. What are you standing around for? Have you finished all your tasks? Ramirez called out to her. No, the nurse swallowed hard. Sorry, I'm coming. And remember, not a word to anyone, he added sternly. What a day it's been. That's it, I'm heading home. Finally. And the manager, stuffing his hands into the pockets of his impeccably white coat, walked down the corridors of the maternity hospital. Laura allowed herself to sob quietly when Ramirez disappeared. What had they done? What had she done? Laura wasn't a real doctor, but she had some knowledge about childbirth and realized that the baby could come at any moment, meaning she needed to do something and do it quickly. Yes, she had promised her boss that they would just get rid of the homeless woman, but the girl's heartless resolve was enough only to drag the poor woman to the hospital's backyard. Now Laura understood and fully realized that this was unthinkable. No matter who this unfortunate woman was, she was, first and foremost, a human being, and therefore deserved help in her situation, and in general. One day, Laura was watching a video that told the story of a dog that wandered into a hospital for people injured. Instead of being chased away, the dog was warmed up and treated. If even this unfortunate stray deserved such care, could a human being not hope for at least a pinch of mercy? But there was one big problem. Laura had no idea what she could do in this situation because Ramirez, at maternity hospital number 13, was, without exaggeration, everything. He kept everyone in check. However, through logical reasoning, Laura understood that there must be compassionate people among the staff who wouldn't care about Ramirez's opinion, especially when it came to saving a human life or bringing a baby into the world. But theoretically, Ramirez could very well make her life as miserable as he had threatened before. Oh yes, others were one thing, but Laura herself was a completely different matter. She was firmly on his hook, and she knew it all too well, much to her own despair. Sniffling, she looked at the clock on the wall. She had been standing like a statue for 15 minutes, and she needed to decide what to do quickly. All right, Laura exhaled, finally deciding what to do next, even gathering some moral strength. So, that leaves Lydia Santana. Without wasting another moment, she rushed to the second floor for help. Being the head chef in a maternity hospital is no big deal, many might think, comparing her duties with the complex tasks the obstetricians, gynecologists, anesthesiologists, and other staff of the main women's hospital dealt with every day. But Lydia Santana never felt sad about working in the kitchen. Just the kitchen. She, more than anyone else, knew how important nutrition was for expectant and new mothers and how difficult it was to provide them with all the necessary nutrients in a way that was filling, tasty, and wouldn't upset the baby's stomachs, connected to their mothers through breast milk. Her colleagues sometimes joked, though quietly and behind her back, that Lydia Santana had achieved so much and was so dedicated to her work only because she remained unmarried. That's why she poured all her untapped capacity for love into the kitchen. That's also why she had such a tough character. Good afternoon, my dears, she might suddenly say, peeking into a room of new mothers. Of course, according to hospital rules, Lydia wasn't supposed to make rounds, but she sometimes disregarded these rules because she was convinced that it was her duty to oversee the nutrition of all her charges. And how could she do that if she didn't personally check now and then to make sure they didn't have anything forbidden stashed away in their fridges or bedside tables? Today, the haul was rich: 2 sticks of smoked sausage, pickled cucumbers, a cake with buttercream frosting, oranges, a half-eaten chocolate bar, and a jar of thick country cream. "What's going on?" whispered one of the new mothers, Lucia, to her neighbor. She was in maternity hospital number 13 on bed rest, with about 2 weeks left until her due date. "Do the doctors have the right to go through our personal belongings like this?" That's not a doctor, that's the head cook, replied Margarita, a seasoned mother who had just given birth to her fourth child, another girl. The cook? Lucia was surprised. By what right? And before her more experienced neighbor, familiar with the hospital's ways, could stop her, the young woman rushed to save her goodies. Hey, give that back. She practically snatched the sausage and chocolate out of Lydia's hands. That's mine. The room fell into a significant silence. The air seemed to thicken with tension, like the kind that precedes a storm. Oh, it's yours, is it? The kitchen queen narrowed her eyes. Well, that's clear. And Lydia launched into a speech that left the mothers with their mouths agape. She scolded Lucia like a little girl, lecturing her on how harmful store-bought sausages and chocolate were for a pregnant woman, especially one with health problems. Yes, Lydia was far from the patient's medical records, but she was well informed about many of them because she knew how to gather gossip and rumors about everyone and everything. In short, the head cook went off, and then, "Thank you for the information," Lucia responded, "but I decide for myself what I can and cannot have. So kindly give it back and don't touch it, or I'll complain." The mother's jaws dropped again. Lucia, having reclaimed her treats for the second time, boldly unwrapped the chocolate right in front of Lydia and popped a piece into her mouth. "How delicious," she exclaimed, rolling her eyes. "I've eaten, I eat, and I will eat. So there." The head of the hospital kitchen froze, clenched her fists, exhaled loudly, and, with a sharp turn, stormed out of the room. "Wow, you're something else," squeaked another mother from her bed, impressed. "You're so brave." She started clapping. Within a minute, the other mothers in the room joined in the applause. "You shouldn't have done that," sighed Margarita, who hadn't joined in. "Why? What's she going to do? Get back at me by oversalting the porridge?" Lucia smirked. Laura happened to run into the very Lydia Santana she was looking for as she was returning to her kingdom of casseroles, pots, and diet tables. Lydia Santana, Laura's ballet flats clicked on the floor. "I need to talk to you." "Excuse me." The girl was completely out of breath. "I'm sorry, I need your help." "Oh, come on," the woman, still hurt by what had happened earlier, snorted. "Why are you running around? Did something happen?" "Yes, something happened," Laura nodded. "And what does that have to do with me? I don't stick my nose into your medical affairs." "I've got enough on my plate," Lydia frowned. "You see, they just brought in a woman," Laura wrung her hands, "and she's lying outside, in the leaves right now." "And why is she lying there?" Lydia asked in surprise. "Has she lost her mind? Or is she one of those, you know, who believe in drawing strength from the earth and all that?" No. It was us who threw her out there," the young nurse began to explain, almost in tears. "You see, when we brought her in, it was just me and our head, Leonardo Ramirez, and he." Lydia listened to it all with a stony expression. "Yes, it seems I thought too highly of him," she finally said. "No, what on earth is happening that you can treat a living person like that? But you, stop crying. Don't cry, silly girl, I'm not scolding you, I'm not angry with you. You, at least, didn't stay silent, you decided to help. Well, let's go now." "Where to?" Laura asked. "We'll call a male nurse, someone strong, or whoever we run into on the way," Lydia explained, already hurrying down the corridor. "We need to get her back inside immediately. After that, whatever needs to be done with the patient is up to you and your medical duties." As they walked, they quickly concocted a story that could protect Laura from Ramirez's wrath, saying that Lydia herself went out during her lunch break to get some fresh air and accidentally stumbled upon the homeless woman. That way, it would seem that Laura had nothing to do with it, and it was all Lydia who found her, keeping Laura out of trouble, as the head had strictly ordered her to keep quiet and not get involved. "But in general, it's not good," Lydia remarked as the conspirators stepped out onto the hospital porch. "You know, the way you let him boss you around." "I'm not letting him boss me around," Laura replied, but she averted her eyes. "Oh, come on, the whole hospital is already gossiping that you're with him. Well, all for the sake of your career." "That's not true," Laura retorted louder and more indignantly, rubbing her eyes because she was on the verge of tears. She was well aware of the dirty rumors about her relationship with Ramirez. There are things that are hard to hide. And yes, part of it was true, but in reality, it didn't even reflect a fraction of what actually connected two such different people, Laura and Leonardo, the simple, struggling nurse, clinging desperately to any chance of improving her life, and the cynical, grasping professional, as well as not a very good head of the department in many respects. Ramirez had his eye on her from the day Laura started her first shift. The newly minted nurse, fresh out of training, a bit naive, and not yet 19. She came here because she was determined to fulfill a dream that had eluded her mother, to become a doctor. Incidentally, Laura had tried to get into medical school that same year but failed to secure a coveted budget spot. Her family couldn't afford to pay for her education. Her family was struggling, barely making ends meet. Her single mother, abandoned by a father who had fled his responsibilities, had barely managed to raise her daughter. But recently, her health had deteriorated, and she was constantly sick with one thing or another, with no relatives or friends to support them. Leonardo Ramirez quickly found out about Laura's difficult family situation, that she and her mother were practically living on her single nurse's salary. So, he decided to take advantage of the situation. And yes, Laura understood this from the beginning. But what could she do? In her desperate attempt to improve her circumstances, she resignedly and submissively fell into his arms, discovering that Leonardo Ramirez could be not only a strict boss, but also a generous benefactor. He helped arrange a convenient schedule and could shift Laura's shifts when she needed to take her mother to another medical appointment. He could give her some money if payday was far off, and she was short. He promised that next year he would pull some strings, and Laura would definitely get a budget spot. He said he would help her career and that she was on the way to becoming a senior nurse. In exchange, well, overall, what Ramirez wanted was tolerable, disgusting, repulsive, sometimes painful, but afterward, Laura felt like no amount of soap and long showers would make her feel clean again. But in principle, yes, it was bearable. Because, what else am I supposed to do, she reasoned. Struggle alone, fighting for a better life? Nonsense. When fate is offering it all on a silver platter. And, deep down, Laura secretly hoped that Leonardo felt something more for her than what was apparent during their encounters. He wasn't handsome, he wasn't married at 39, and who knows? Maybe there is some truth to those fairy tales about Cinderella's and Beauty and the Beast, she mused. Maybe there is a future for her and the head of the department? At the moment, Laura couldn't and didn't want to change her situation, no matter how much of it she disliked and feared. Yes, it's a hopeless situation, Lydia's voice snapped her out of her thoughts. They finally reached the back hospital courtyard, where they were met with a picturesque, somewhat oddly beautiful scene titled The Emergence of New Life against the backdrop of fading autumn nature. But they had arrived in time. Meaning there was still time to call for help from a male nurse and alert the maternity ward staff. "We'll carry her," the male nurse said, lifting the woman onto a stretcher. "Please, just bear with us a little longer," he addressed the expectant mother. "I don't think she can hear you," said Marietta, the obstetrician-gynecologist who had joined this unexpected adventure. "Careful, mind those steps. Oh, there's a ramp. Let's take her through there. Lydia, will you help us?" Lydia, who had already played her part in all this, observed from the sidelines. As for Laura, she had already fled and disappeared somewhere in the maternity ward at Lydia's insistence. As per their story, she had nothing to do with it. "I won't help," the head cook pursed her lips. "I've already done my part by calling you, because it's the right thing to do, but I'm not a doctor." Curious onlookers peeked out of the reception area onto the porch. Hospital staff and some visitors who had come to check on their relatives or to visit them. "Aren't there special facilities in the city for people like that?" one man grimaced. He had just been visiting his wife, the same Margarita with many children. "For what kind of people?" Marietta scolded him. She's just pregnant. Oh, I mean, already in labor. Now get out of the way. What do you think this is? A zoo? And amidst the commotion, no one immediately noticed the appearance of a new face in the situation. This face arrived at the maternity hospital in a clearly expensive black SUV, jumped out in a hurry, and rushed to the entrance, kicking up orange fallen leaves with polished shoes. Natalia. Natalia, my wife. Is she here? This handsome man, around 40 years old, dressed in a formal business suit and an obviously expensive coat, didn't wait for an answer. He pushed Marietta aside from the stretcher and bent over the homeless woman, who, despite suffering through contractions, still seemed to be in a strange, heavy state, either delirium or a half-sleep. Silence fell on the hospital porch. It seemed you could hear the sound of little bugs burrowing under the autumn leaves for the winter. Half of the witnesses to the commotion with the unusual patient were stunned because they recognized the man, who turned out to be the husband of this homeless-looking creature. The other half didn't understand yet, but they picked up on the stunned mood of the first group. Pablo, the homeless woman, finally showed some sign of consciousness and slightly opened her eyes. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." "It's okay, darling, it's not your fault," the handsome man in the business suit said with heartfelt tenderness, leaning in to kiss the homeless woman on the cheek. "Everything will be fine. I'm here with you. I love you." Someone among the witnesses on the porch sniffled, touched by the scene. "Is that really him?" asked the same man who had expressed discontent earlier. "I can't believe my eyes." "What are you talking about?" A curious woman peered over his shoulder. "Why is everyone just standing around?" "Get a doctor," the well-groomed, impressive man exclaimed, his eyes flashing so fiercely that everyone felt a little guilty, even if they had nothing to do with it and were just passing by. "But I'm a doctor," Marietta responded. "If you don't get in the way, we'll take care of your wife right now. You're her husband, right? I have some questions for you. Is this her first pregnancy? What's her blood type? Any conditions we should know about? How old is she? Has she been monitored during her pregnancy?" Marietta was firing off questions like a true professional, and the man in the suit answered them clearly and succinctly. "That's Pablo Fernandez," the earlier disgruntled visitor quickly shared with the curious onlookers. "The whole city's talking about him. Businessman, millionaire, and our main philanthropist. He bought a piece of land with his own money, built a park there, opened all sorts of attractions for kids, and everything's at rock-bottom prices or free for large families and the poor. He's always helping pensioners, animal shelters, and generally cares about the environment. In short, he waved his hand, he's that kind of person." "But how did he manage to marry a homeless woman?" someone asked in bewilderment. "What? Is this another act of charity?" The person who asked the question chuckled. "No, she's not homeless, she's Natalia Fernandez, a well-known journalist. They got married a year ago, but even when she was heavily pregnant, she kept running around, writing her articles. And now, it seems she ran herself into trouble," he shrugged. "But for some reason, she really doesn't look like herself. Maybe it's makeup," someone in the small crowd speculated. "You know, like actors in the theater. Why not? In movies, they show all sorts of monsters, but they're not real, just made up." "Move aside," Marietta barked, and the stretcher with the laboring woman finally made it inside the hospital. And then began the important, precisely coordinated hustle and bustle that this place was so familiar with. They needed to take care of both the mother and the child who was about to be born. And as for the makeup, the observer in the crowd wasn't wrong. It really was makeup. In fact, the orderly in the delivery room nearly fainted when the hooked, warty nose on the laboring woman's sweaty face began to slide off. But Marietta quickly brought her back to her senses and told her to tidy up the poor woman a bit while there was still time between contractions. "It's unhygienic to give birth in all this masquerade," she said sternly. And Marietta was prepared for anything. She even pulled the anesthesiologist out of their well-earned lunch break, saying, "We have a disaster here. But the worst fears weren't realized, and surprisingly quickly, surprisingly easily, Natalia Fernandez gave birth to twin boys, strong and beautiful, who immediately filled the maternity ward with their melodious, newborn cries. "I want to see my wife," said Pablo Fernandez, with a growling note in his voice, which was more of a command than a request. He was a head taller than the slender Marietta, but she didn't flinch, only spreading her arms as a precaution, because she sensed this man was used to getting his way, even if it meant bulldozing through. "Sorry, but you'll have to follow the rules," she said firmly. "Visiting hours are over, and your wife is too weak right now. She needs rest." "And have you lost your mind? I won't let you hold your sons. They can't be touched right now." "But you said they're fine?" Fernandez furrowed his brow. But there was such genuine concern in his voice that Marietta's heart ached with sympathy for the new father. She already knew that this was his first time, in the sense that this was his first time becoming a father. "Everything is fine," Marietta replied. "Those are just the rules. We need to make sure the babies are okay." "No, they aren't seriously ill, don't worry, but given the condition their mother was in, she wasn't fully aware of herself. We have reason to be concerned about the baby's health. We need to check them, observe them, you understand? Please be patient. Look, other fathers, grandmothers, and grandfathers are now standing under the windows, ready to wait until they can see the little ones. You know, those who can't wait for visiting hours. Don't worry, Papa," she smiled encouragingly. "You'll get to spend so much time with your sons that you'll want to escape to the North Pole. Just be patient a little longer, okay?" "All right," Pablo exhaled, relaxing his shoulders. "They weren't supposed to be born here," he added darkly. "Were you planning on a private hospital?" Marietta asked. "Well, sorry," she spread her hands, "you should have thought about that sooner. I mean, not letting your wife. By the way, how did it happen that she ended up in such a state, on the city dump, right before giving birth? Forgive my bluntness, but that's completely irresponsible and abnormal for expectant parents." "My wife does what she wants," Pablo replied. "I can't forbid her. She had to continue her investigation. She's a journalist." As for the hospital, he smirked. "No, my children were supposed to be born at home, in our family house, in the same bed where 6 generations of Fernandez were born." "Home birth?" Marietta gasped. She completely ignored the part about the journalistic work because she was touched on a professional topic, and it was just too much. "Hey," Marietta fearlessly poked him in the chest, hitting the tie pin shaped like a snarling wolf's head made of silver with ruby eyes. "Are you one of those who don't believe in modern medicine? And don't tell me you also have a midwife." "I do," Pablo squinted his eyes. "Patricia Esteban, a hereditary midwife, healer, and herbalist. She delivers both human babies and the offspring of domestic animals. She knows how to heal. Not all illnesses, of course, but many." "What ancient fairy tale did you come out of?" Marietta gasped. "Are you out of your mind? No, your wife was lucky to end up here. And now, if you please." Marietta froze because Pablo, gently taking her hand, planted a light kiss on her knuckles. "I apologize for my impatience. Fine, I'll respect your rules and wait until I can visit my wife with your permission. But now I must go. Until we meet again." And with a sharp turn, he walked down the corridor. "Madman," Marietta muttered after he disappeared around the corner, raising her hands and rubbing her cheeks. No, no, and no again. She would not blush like some silly girl, especially over a meaningless, old-fashioned, gallant gesture from a patient's husband. Not for anything in the world, because she hadn't lost her mind yet. Laura understood perfectly well that after she had, so to speak, fulfilled her moral duty towards the unfortunate homeless woman, it was time for her to get back to her own tasks, which, as a nurse in the maternity ward, she always had in abundance. But she just couldn't calm down. She was tormented by the thought of her own low, inhumane behavior. Yes, everything turned out fine, and Laura had already learned that the poor woman had successfully become a mother and was now resting and regaining her strength. However, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had done something for which there could be no forgiveness. And what if, Laura pondered, Leonardo had threatened me into doing something even more horrible? Am I such a rotten person at my core that I would have caved to those vile threats? And then, in a desperate attempt to justify herself, Laura began telling herself that the act she had committed was impulsive, and it didn't count because she had almost immediately rushed to save the poor woman. In short, the young nurse was too preoccupied to perform her duties. It all ended with Laura dropping a stack of clean sheets on the floor and getting scolded by another nurse. "Go outside and get some fresh air," her colleague suggested. What a day! Everyone's lost their minds over this homeless woman. As if there's nothing else to do in the maternity ward. Laura decided that it really would be good for her to step outside for a moment. The sun was setting, touching the roofs of the neighboring houses, and the air was filled with that unusual freshness that's only possible in autumn. Her phone rang in her pocket, and seeing the caller's name, Laura hurried to answer. "Hi, Mom. How are you? How are you feeling? Did you eat?" After hearing the answers, Laura sighed. Nothing new. Her mother hadn't been feeling well since the morning. She was dizzy, her blood pressure was fluctuating, her heart ached, but today, at least, she had managed to convince herself to eat lunch. Laura had left prepared food that just needed to be heated up. Thank goodness, she thought, that her mother could still manage that task on her own. They talked a little more about what appointments her mother had, and what they should do about the overdue consumer loans, for which the banks were calling more persistently and less kindly. Laura then promised her mother that there would be no shortage of medication this month. She would get a new supply, no matter what. Laura ended the call, put her phone back in her pocket, and was about to return to the maternity ward when she suddenly bumped into a broad male chest. "Oh, sorry," she squeaked. "I didn't see you," she added, embarrassed. "No problem," Pablo Fernandez smiled. "I snuck up on you, and I'm sorry, but I couldn't help overhearing part of your conversation." "Really?" Laura blinked nervously, trying to figure out if she had said anything she shouldn't have. "From the bottom of my heart, I wish your mother a speedy recovery," Pablo smiled again. "Health is the greatest treasure in our world." "Thank you," Laura replied and timidly smiled back. "I completely agree with you. It's just a shame that people often remember it only when there's almost none of it left." "And what exactly, if you don't mind me asking, is your mother suffering from?" "Oh, we've got a bit of everything," the girl waved her hand. "Hypertension, asthma, arrhythmia, varicose veins, arthritis, a whole lot of things. It's hard to know what to treat first, but we're holding on. Yes, we're managing little by little." "And you," she decided to change the subject because she always felt uncomfortable sharing her problems with others. "Were you visiting someone here, I assume? Did a relative just give birth or is about to become a mother?" "My wife, 2 boys," Pablo replied. "I was just in shock when I found out where she might be. We thought we had at least another week. I told her it was dangerous, but you know, these journalists are sometimes such adventurers." He sighed. Laura froze, as if a real wolf had just peeked out from the bushes at her, because she had heard about this journalist who somehow ended up disguised as a homeless person and then ended up here. Yes, rumors spread through the maternity ward faster than infections, which meant that right now, the man standing in front of her was the husband of that poor woman whom she, Laura, had helped throw out by the hands and feet. Oh, what a nightmare. "What's wrong? What happened?" Pablo asked her. Laura realized that she was crying, tears streaming down like a flood breaking through a dam. "I'm sorry, it's my fault," she mumbled through her sobs. "I threw your wife out. I'm a monster." "What? Threw her out where?" Pablo frowned. "Natalia is in a room, she's fine." "What are you talking about? Please explain yourself properly." And Laura explained. Sniffling and crumpling the tissues he handed her, she told him how the homeless woman had been brought to them, how she didn't sit well with the head doctor, and what he made her do. However, Laura didn't mention anything specific about Ramirez's threats. She only said that he forced her to do it. I was so scared that because we left her there, something might happen to her or the baby, she mumbled, still sobbing. I'm so relieved that your wife and the babies are okay. Please forgive me, I didn't mean to. Stop crying, Pablo ordered her, both strictly and gently. I'm not scolding you, I'm not blaming you, and I'm certainly not going to punish you. Well, thank you for being honest. So, it's Leonardo Ramirez. I haven't heard that name in a while, and it seems he hasn't changed a bit. How interesting, what a small world. Well then, Pablo patted Laura on the shoulder in a friendly manner. Thank you for pointing out an unpleasant person. Don't worry about anything, Laura. I'll handle everything as needed. Having said this, Pablo descended the porch steps with an easy gait, walked to the parking lot, got into his SUV, started it, and drove off. Laura watched him with a thoughtful look. Yes, she had stopped crying, but she had just realized what she had done. It was one thing to complain to Lydia, someone she considered one of her own in the maternity ward, and quite another to Pablo Fernandez, about whom there were so many rumors in the city. Oh dear, what had she done? And now what would happen? What was he going to do? What did he mean when he said he would handle everything? Surely, he had something in mind, and now it seemed Leonardo Ramirez was in danger, and she, Laura, was to blame for it. What a fool I am, the girl exclaimed. She gave herself a light but sharp slap on the cheek and started crying again because she suddenly realized that if Ramirez got into trouble and figured out who was responsible, then her mother would certainly no longer have access to that miraculous medicine, without which it was uncertain how much longer she would live. When the first rumor reached the mothers peacefully residing in their room that a homeless woman would be placed with them, it naturally caused quite a commotion and a wave of indignation. Lucia, still fired up from her earlier confrontation over sausage and other treats, was ready to go complain to the highest authority in the maternity ward when the second rumor flew into the room, that this wasn't a homeless woman at all, but a journalist pretending to be one because she had to. And she's married to a millionaire, Margarita added, putting the final touch on the gossip, Pablo Fernandez himself. And then she fell silent because they brought in the young mother, Natalia, and discussing someone when they were right there next to them was naturally considered impolite by all the room's inhabitants. But how they longed to know all the details of this tangled story. Sorry to bother you, one of the room's residents finally decided to address the newcomer. How are you feeling? We just heard you weren't feeling well, she added timidly. I seem to be alive, Natalia replied with a smile. Thank you for your concern, I'm feeling better now. You won't believe it, but I almost don't remember giving birth. It's almost a shame, she sighed, I missed such priceless moments. I don't remember any pain, nothing. Oh, Margarita said, you're worried about that? I'd love to forget my last delivery, but I can't imagine going through it again. But really, the most important thing is that you and your babies are okay. They are, right? Yes. The doctors say they're fine, Natalia nodded. I can't wait for them to bring them to me to feed, she added sheepishly. Is it true that you pretended to be homeless because you're working on a journalistic investigation? Lucia, the most curious, couldn't hold back. Oh, give her a break, Margarita shushed her. No, it's okay, Natalia smiled. Yes, it's true, I had to do it. You're probably wondering what could have made me take such a risk so late in my pregnancy. Don't be shy, I'm quite comfortable talking about it. I'm a journalist. Personally, I don't need bread, but give me someone to talk to. Especially since soon my colleagues will learn all about this, she waved her hand. So, if you have any questions, feel free to ask. But if you'd rather not, I won't bore you with my chatter, you've got enough on your plate with motherhood. The women in the room exchanged glances and, without any discussion, unanimously decided that they wanted to listen, which they made known. And so Natalia began to speak. It all started a few months ago. It began when the grandmother of a friend of mine became seriously ill. She was diagnosed with cancer, and although the treatment was having some effect, she suddenly refused to continue it. Naturally, her family and doctors started questioning her, trying to understand the reason, but the elderly woman only repeated that she didn't want to poison herself with chemicals and that she had found some miracle natural remedy that would definitely help her. Then it turned out that she had spent all her savings and sold her antique collection, which her own great-grandfather had started, all to pay for this so-called medicine. Naturally, her family raised the alarm. They tried to convince her that this was a scam, that she was being deceived. But she got offended and eventually claimed that her relatives had been bribed by global pharmaceutical corporations, who were preventing honest scientists from openly bringing to market medicines that could cure all diseases. In the end, her family couldn't convince her, and she passed away. It was only later, when they were going through her belongings, that they found vials with the remnants of some fragrant tinctures. They showed them to a chemist friend, who said, "Yes, it's just herbs, an alcohol tincture. No stronger than chamomile or linden." That's how it happened. And then it happened again. Another elderly person got caught. This time it was an old man who had suffered from insomnia and neurosis all his life. He also started receiving this strange, supposedly miraculous drug from someone and took out loans to pay for it. Fortunately, his family managed to save him. They simply locked him up at home, took away his phone, and didn't let him do anything foolish. And then there were other cases as well. In general, that's how I got interested in this. I felt that something significant was going on here, that it wasn't as simple as it seemed, especially since, according to what the pensioners were saying, the person selling them this medicine was no ordinary individual. Personally, I believe that he might be a doctor himself, maybe even a scientist, said Natalia. How awful. You'd have to be completely heartless to take advantage of defenseless old people like that. Who would fall for something like that these days? Lucia shook her head. I would never in my life be fooled by something like that. Don't be so sure, Margarita looked at her sternly. When a loved one is sick or when you're in trouble yourself, you can believe anything and give everything just to be saved. And did you find anything out? How did you end up among the homeless at the dump? Lucia asked impatiently. And that's where it gets interesting, Natalia smirked and continued. At the online publishing house where she worked, there were journalists who had already dealt with fraud stories, and they decided to help her. They started going through the whole story again from the beginning and realized that the criminal was indeed very clever, a real Dr. Evil. It seemed that he didn't reach his victims by chance. He appeared to carefully select elderly people who had something to take and was also well informed about their overall health. This mysterious villain was incredibly cunning. No, after the first few interactions with his victim, he would disappear from sight and no longer met with them in person to deliver the medicine. Natalia found out that he used several homeless people as couriers. That's how Natalia ended up at the dump. She hoped to talk to two homeless men, Paolo and Ramiro, who, according to rumors passed through many intermediaries, were the couriers for this mysterious fake doctor. But I ran into an old acquaintance there, Natalia sighed. There was one homeless man who used to work as a professor at a university, but after his wife cheated on him, he started drinking and lost his apartment. We tried to help him once, as part of a report on how the homeless are returning to normal life. And what do you think? We couldn't help him. As soon as we cleaned him up, fed him, and placed him in a shelter, his ex-wife rushed over and started screaming that he owed her alimony. Not for a child, they didn't have any children, she wanted him to support her, to give her money for herself. Can you imagine? She wasn't even disabled or anything, just like that. So, he ran away from the shelter, saying that he preferred the freedom of a homeless life. And when I came to the dump, he recognized me and started yelling that I was a journalist and that I was going to ruin everything for them, expose all their secrets. So, they came at me a bit, hit me on the head, Natalia grimaced and rubbed the back of her head. The doctor said it wasn't exactly a concussion, but something similar. In the end, I didn't find Ramiro and Paolo, and now I can't even imagine when I'll be able to resume my journalistic investigation. After all, I've had children now, and after what happened, my husband won't let me go anywhere." "Well, that's right," Margarita nodded. "You're a mother now, you need to think about your babies." "Well, can't anyone else take care of this?" "Don't worry. After you've uncovered so much, you'll definitely be able to expose this villain." "You know," Natalia said thoughtfully, "I feel like I missed something. I think this scammer is very close by, but I just haven't noticed some important detail yet." The next morning was unusually gloomy and overcast, a stark contrast to the previous day, a truly autumnal day. Leonardo Ramirez, as he stepped out of the entrance of the luxury residential complex where he owned an apartment, frowned in displeasure because he had forgotten his umbrella, and he thought about how he couldn't imagine making it through the remaining time until his vacation. He was so tired. All those mothers, all those babies. No, Ramirez didn't regret choosing this profession and eventually landing such a good position. He knew how to do his job well, to be polite, considerate, responsible, and serious where necessary. However, he thought with a crooked grin, if it weren't for his little side business, which he had quietly started over the past few years, he would probably have remained just an ordinary head of department. No, the position itself was great, and the salary was decent, but Ramirez always wanted more, and more. He simply couldn't help it after everything he had been through. He was born into a family about which people couldn't say a kind word, but they had plenty of unkind words to say, often in abundance. His father drank and beat his mother. His mother drank and, in his father's absence, brought home shady drinking buddies. Together, his parents would beat little Leonardo whenever he happened to get in their way. People said that nothing good would come of him, that he would end up just like his wayward parents, drinking himself to death before he even reached adulthood. But Leonardo was adamantly opposed to this. With desperate diligence and stubborn determination, he worked hard to do well in school. At the age of 14, he started working part-time and literally fought with his mother and father to keep every penny for himself. Then, as soon as he turned 18, he moved out to live in a dormitory. The world of medicine seemed to Leonardo like a magical refuge from the dirty, disgusting, vile, and corrupt life in which he had spent his early years. In medicine, there was order and cleanliness, nothing was spoiled, only improved. Leonardo excelled. His teachers praised him, and his classmates envied him. He was willing to study and absorb additional materials day and night. He was the most diligent, talented, and capable student. He was determined to stop at nothing to make something of himself. When his parents died after consuming tainted alcohol, he didn't even attend their funeral. 6 months later, when he could finally manage the inheritance, he sold their apartment and used the money for a down payment on a mortgage. Afterward came years of hard work in a women's clinic at the maternity hospital. Leonardo Ramirez was a good doctor. However, he was also known as excessively strict, cynical, rough, and at times even heartless. No one could boast of being his friend, and he had no personal life, only brief, meaningless flings. But he was focused on building his career, and then, one day, he realized how he could obtain much more than he already had. It all started with one mother. This simple woman, who had come to the city from the countryside with her husband to earn a living, was named Rafaela. She was rather amusing, always worrying that something might happen to her baby. She constantly asked the doctor if she needed to take any vitamins or if he could recommend any medications to ensure a smooth delivery. At the time, Leonardo had one small problem in his life, a delinquent loan. It was really stressing him out. "We don't have much, but we'll find the money if necessary," Rafaela would often say. "You see, this is our firstborn," she added with an embarrassed smile. "I simply can't afford for anything to happen to him. You understand, doctor, in our family, all the women have difficult deliveries. I'm so scared. While I was still in the village, I even went to see a healer." "A healer?" Leonardo asked absent-mindedly. "I thought these superstitions had died out." It might be a superstition to you city folks, Rafaela replied, slightly offended, but there are people who know what needs to be done, who know which herbs to gather to help. You may not believe it, but we recently had a case where a tractor driver almost lost his legs. The doctor said he would never walk again, but this old woman muttered over him, brewed the right herbs, and made him drink them. And what do you think? He walked again. And he even danced at a wedding, so much so that everyone's jaws dropped. They gave that old woman a cow as a gift. A whole cow? Leonardo smirked. Quite a hefty price for herbal tea. When you're sick, when you're in need, Rafaela sighed, you'd give anything. There's no price on health, doctor. You know that yourself. Yes, I know, Leonardo said thoughtfully. An idea began to form in his mind, and later he approached Rafaela, seizing a moment when she was alone, breathing fresh air in the hospital courtyard, and started talking to her. He admitted that her story had deeply moved him, and since she was preparing to give birth despite the weak health that ran in her family, he said that he had something for her. Something that couldn't be easily found for sale because it was a new, innovative drug. It was created in India, Leonardo confided, in a lab in collaboration with leading scientists from America and the UK. Its mechanism of action is based on the interaction of active components directly with the human genome, simultaneously with the genome of both the mother and the child. Do you understand, Rafaela? And it's completely natural. It contains rare, endangered plants from the slopes of the Tibetan mountains. He told her a lot more, and then he said that, unfortunately, he had only one bottle of this miracle drug, which he had miraculously obtained through acquaintances. He added that he had been offered a lot of money for it, but as a doctor who had taken an oath, he prioritized real help over profit, so he was willing to give the medicine to someone who truly needed it. The poor village girl was almost in tears, and she paid up. Leonardo managed to extract from her a sum large enough to pay off his loan, with enough left over to hire a girl of easy virtue. This marked the beginning of his, no, not his downfall. Leonardo never thought of himself in such a degrading way. He preferred to call it an adventure. Yes, an adventure. In the end, Ramirez reasoned, those who are willing to be deceived will be deceived anyway. They'll lose their money to some scammer. So why shouldn't he get that money? After all, those other scammers, Leonardo thought, are probably terrible people who bring no benefit to society, whereas he, at the very least, is a doctor. He helps mothers and children. So, in essence, he balances out his not-so-good actions with good ones. Isn't that right? Isn't balance what matters in this world? Black and white. Good and evil. In short, Leonardo had his own philosophy that justified everything he did, and it suited him perfectly. However, Leonardo also fully understood that if anyone discovered his little business, his ideas would likely not be shared, and he would face serious consequences. So, he was cautious, prudent, forward-thinking, meticulous, and cautious again. Leonardo carefully selected his future victims, that is, clients, and very delicately took their money, that is, accepted payment. Yes, in Leonardo's mind, the real names for his activities and how he preferred to label them constantly mixed. However, he was occasionally plagued by a nasty, dark feeling, as if, well, it felt like pangs of conscience, and Leonardo tried to rid himself of it as if it were symptoms of poisoning or some kind of shameful, disgusting disease because he didn't want it to torment him. Why should it? Why on earth should it, when he had only just begun to live well? And then, Laura had recently entered his life. And this was also complicated because, initially, he hadn't intended to treat her as anything more than a silly, amusing diversion. But lately, this girl had awakened other feelings in him. And how it irritated him, making him almost hate Laura. In Leonardo's eyes, she was too righteous, kind, and compassionate. In short, she was his complete opposite. This both painfully attracted and tormented him at the same time. And, by the way, Leonardo initially hadn't planned to make Laura one of his clients because it went against all his rules. Firstly, it was simply dangerous because Leonardo usually sold his concoctions to people who weren't part of his close circle. At most, he sold them to patients at the maternity hospital, and even then, he eventually abandoned that idea. Secondly, he usually sold the remedy only once, but he had been supplying Laura's mother with it for several months already. However, Leonardo couldn't stop now because, firstly, he enjoyed toying with the girl, keeping her under control in every way possible, and secondly, he suddenly realized that theoretically, he could extract a lot from this particular client because Laura and her mother had an apartment that, perhaps, could somehow be seized. Yes, it wasn't a luxury property, but a place in the city center was a tempting piece of real estate. In short, Leonardo realized that he was somewhat stuck, but he wasn't planning to panic just yet. No, he was going to take full advantage of all the opportunities that had presented themselves to him. Leonardo had just approached his car and grabbed the driver's side door handle when suddenly a shadow darted at him from the side, striking him in the stomach, twisting him sharply, and slamming his lower back against the hood. Gasping for air, Leonardo looked wide-eyed at Pablo Fernandez looming over him. "Long time no see, you little snake," Pablo smirked. Leonardo froze in fear. Pablo Fernandez, his former classmate. The perfect, well-behaved boy from a good family. Everyone knew that he was from a rural area, but not just any rural area. His parents owned a substantial farming operation as well as other businesses, and during the school year, Pablo lived in the city with relatives. Despite his family being able to afford to send him to any prestigious private school, he attended a regular one because his family liked the teaching staff and wanted their son to be raised simply. He joined their class in the 7th grade, and Pablo quickly became popular in school because he was an excellent student and eager to participate in various activities and school life. And he immediately took notice of Leonardo, and soon a very complicated relationship developed between them. The thing was, Pablo decided to take Leonardo under his wing as someone from a troubled background. He bluntly said, "Let's stick together, and let me help you out with money. Pay for the school supplies you need if your parents can't manage." "Why are you being so kind?" Leonardo was surprised. He sensed some sort of catch, and there was indeed one, because, as Pablo explained, it was an act of charity. "So, you just pity me and decided to take care of me like I'm a stray dog?" Leonardo's face turned red with indignation. He had never been so humiliated, and he immediately told Pablo that he didn't need or want any help. "Why not?" Pablo was puzzled. "There's nothing wrong with admitting you're in trouble. What if I don't want to be saved? Maybe I'm fine as I am?" Leonardo stepped back, glaring at his classmate with a look full of hatred. "It's easy for you rich folks to solve other people's problems, isn't it? Throw some money at it, and you think you're good people? What are you talking about?" Pablo said. "Listen, I didn't mean to offend you. I just wanted. I don't care what you wanted." Leonardo shouted and spat at Pablo's feet. At that moment, all he could do was hide his pain behind the anger and fury he was projecting. The pain of his own helplessness, because Leonardo was well aware that his life wasn't easy, that it was full of hardships, but it was humiliating to accept help from anyone. He didn't want it at all. And from that moment on, Leonardo considered Pablo his personal enemy. Why? For everything. Especially because, it turned out, before offering his help, Pablo had spread rumors throughout the school that he was ready to take the wayward classmate under his wing and turn him into a respectable person. No, Leonardo firmly decided he didn't want anyone turning him into a respectable person. He would manage on his own, thank you very much, he had his pride. Incidentally, Pablo's parents took him out of school just before the final year, deciding that he needed to focus on advanced math and several foreign languages, so they transferred him to a private high school. But before the paths of these two teenagers diverged, Leonardo did everything in his power to make Pablo's life miserable. No, he didn't openly fight with him, but quietly came up with all sorts of ways, like spreading silly rumors about him or convincing him to give their homeroom teacher a bottle of perfume for Teacher's Day, claiming it was her favorite scent. But first, the poor woman was allergic to perfume, and second, the principal scolded Pablo, saying that giving a teacher perfume was inappropriate and in poor taste. And when Pablo left the school, Leonardo felt like he could finally breathe easily. And now, after all these years during which Leonardo hadn't even been interested in what happened to Pablo, they met again. "Fernandez?" Leonardo croaked, pinned harshly against his own car. "What are you? What am I doing?" Pablo narrowed his eyes. "I'm wondering if I should beat the life out of you right now. I can't even believe it. Why are you so mad at me?" Leonardo struggled. "What? You're trying to settle some old school grudge. Isn't it a bit late for that? We're adults now. Let go of me, you psycho." "Old school grudge?" Pablo said, momentarily confused, but then he frowned again. "No, it's about what you did to my wife." "Your wife?" Now it was Leonardo's turn to be confused. "Who is she, anyway?" "Unbelievable, you haven't lost your touch for lying," Pablo hissed. "You threw my wife out onto the street." "Threw her onto the street?" Leonardo, who was never at his best in the mornings, was even more confused now, but then he remembered something, his eyes widening. "You mean the homeless woman?" "Her name is Natalia," Fernandez growled. "How was I supposed to know she was your wife?" The grip on him finally loosened, and Leonardo twisted free, jumping back. "They brought in a homeless woman. What, was I supposed to put her in the same room as the normal mothers?" That morning, the parking lot was surprisingly empty. Pablo and Leonardo stood facing each other, tense, like predators ready to pounce. "So you didn't know?" Pablo asked, as if asking again or finally believing what the other man had said. "I didn't know," Leonardo snorted. "How did you even end up with her?" "She's not homeless," Pablo sighed. "It's a long story." "Never mind." "So, you didn't," now the man looked somewhat confused, "you didn't intend to harm Natalia because she's my wife? Think about what you're saying." Leonardo twirled a finger near his temple. "How was I supposed to know? She was brought in without any documents. She wasn't even aware of herself." "All right," Pablo nodded, "and you threw a woman in that condition out, didn't you? What else was I supposed to do?" Leonardo exclaimed, and then asked, "How did you even find out about this? Did she tell you herself?" "That's not important," Pablo replied evasively. "Ah, so not from her, which means someone in the hospital has a big mouth. Listen, why did you even rush over here, huh? I mean, I can figure out how it happened. Someone from our staff told you, right? By the way, who was it?" Leonardo smirked, and he didn't really need Pablo to answer because it was already clear to him. "You're such a rotten person." Pablo shook his head. "And to think I once believed you could grow into a decent human being. So we're back to making predictions about my future, are we?" Leonardo chuckled. "I don't get it. What's your problem with me? In what sense am I rotten?" "I'll have you know," he said, nervously straightening his rumpled clothes, "I'm the head of a maternity ward. A respected and important profession, by the way. And what happened in childhood and youth doesn't count for anything. If your only issue with me is that I didn't want to ruin a decent place with homeless people." "Stop," he put his hands up just in case. "We've already established that I didn't know she was your wife, right? So if that's your only complaint, then back off. I'll have you know I'm one of the best, if not the best, at what I do, and no one at the hospital has any reason to criticize me. All my patients give birth to healthy babies, and—" "Leonardo," Pablo interrupted, and there was something in his tone that made Ramirez fall silent and listen. He really did listen. "Yes, I'll admit I acted impulsively, that I wanted to give you a good beating for what you did to my wife. And yes, without understanding the situation, I thought you did it on purpose because she's my wife and we didn't get along when we were kids. Fine, we've established that you didn't intentionally harm my family. I was foolish. I forgot she was in disguise, without documents, and you couldn't have known right away that she was my wife since you don't know her and we haven't spoken in years. But don't you think it's wrong to deny medical help to someone, even if they are homeless?" "No," Leonardo shook his head. His gaze was cold, almost steely. It says a lot about you as a person, and no matter what your reputation might be, something tells me you're not as squeaky clean as you'd like to appear. And I, Leonardo, I'm going to expose you. Psycho. Ramirez spat, twirling his finger near his temple, and cautiously, giving Pablo a wide berth, he made his way back to his car. What a psycho. I'm perfectly sane. Can't you see that? I don't care. That's your problem. You don't know anything about me, Leonardo retorted and finally started his car. He sped off the parking lot and drove through the city, pushing the speed limit. He needed to get to work, he needed to think things through. And besides, Leonardo smirked crookedly, it's a good thing he was going on vacation in just a couple of days. He'd get a break from everything, and then, well, he'd figure something out, like he always did. Marietta. Lydia's frantic voice echoed down the maternity ward corridor. Marietta, where are you? Help! The woman being called quickened her pace. No way, Marietta thought, she wasn't falling for this again. Her shift hadn't just ended, it was officially over. She glanced at her wristwatch, 10 minutes ago. So, she had every right not to respond. She was tired, she was leaving, heading home to a cup of coffee with her favorite chocolates and the unfinished romance novel about a duke and an innocent girl without a dowry. But Marietta hadn't counted on one thing, it was very difficult to hide from Lydia when she was looking for you. Aha! There you are! Lydia exclaimed, finally catching up to her. Marietta turned to her with a grimace. Whatever's going on, I'm off the clock. I'm going home. But the head cook started. No buts, Marietta waved a finger in front of her nose. I've had enough of yesterday's adventure. I'll go crazy if I don't get some rest. Got it? As clear as can be, Lydia said, throwing up her hands. But we've got a situation, you see. And she fell silent. Marietta tapped her foot nervously. Should she turn around and leave? She had every right, but she also had a strong sense of professional duty, and once again, it won out over her fatigue. All right. What happened? The situation was indeed serious because Pablo Fernandez had returned, and once again, he showed up at a time when visiting hours were not allowed. Moreover, he practically barged into the room with the mothers, carrying something that was strictly not recommended. One huge basket of exotic fruits and another large one filled with some equally exotic fragrant flowers. Maybe you can calm him down? Lydia pleaded. I'm afraid he's going to climb the wall and enter through the window. I don't want to say anything bad about the man, but it seems to me that he doesn't understand the word no. Ugh, Marietta rolled her eyes, I get the picture. Fine, she sighed, I'll have a word with him, and then I'm going home. Got it? She pointed her finger at the cook, who nodded in agreement. Oh, how angry Marietta was. By the time she made her way downstairs, she was ready to give Pablo Fernandez a thorough scolding, at the very least, and at most, she was prepared to slap him to teach him how to behave properly. As she reflected on her own thoughts, Marietta mused, I really need a good night's sleep if these kinds of silly ideas are popping into my head. Good afternoon, she said, marching decisively towards the man. Yes, it was Fernandez. Just look at him, sitting there on the bench, all handsome and smug, with those baskets of his, impressive, beautiful, and grand. Yes, he had been very generous. His wife was lucky. What did we agree on yesterday? Marietta addressed the visitor sternly. That you wouldn't behave like a barbarian and that you would follow the rules. Sorry, he said, looking at her strangely, as if seeing her for the first time, and he also appeared a bit off, not quite himself. I'm telling you that you are obliged to follow at least the basic rules. And if you can't understand that these, she pointed to the flowers and fruits, are not recommended to bring to a woman who has just given birth, not to mention that such strong scents could trigger allergies in the other mothers, then, please, she spread her hands, at least wait until visiting hours. You look good being strict, the man said with a broad smile. Marietta was stunned with indignation. How dare he? Was he flirting with her? And yes, you're right. I can't stand rules. I prefer to make my own, but for you, I'm willing to make an exception. You're too pretty a doctor. By the way, what are you doing this evening? Marietta thought she couldn't be more outraged, but this man was pushing her limits. And about that, I will have to tell your wife. Poor woman, struggling to give you heirs, and you. Excuse me, in an instant, he was uncomfortably close, grabbing her hand and giving it a gallant kiss. What kind of nonsense is this? Marietta's hand flew up to slap him, but it was caught mid-air. Sorry, he repeated, locking eyes with her, but I'm not married. What? Marietta was completely taken aback. I'm not married. I'm afraid there's been a mistake. You probably mistook me for my brother. Brother? If a UFO had landed right in the middle of the hospital courtyard, Marietta would have been less shocked. You see, Pablo and I are twins. This has led to some confusing situations before. I'm afraid it's happened again. Allow me to introduce myself. He finally let go of her, Samuel Fernandez. Now, you're not planning to hit me anymore, are you? No. I'm sorry, I must have been mistaken, but you, she waved her hand near her face, you really do look alike, although you have a more predatory look. Oh, did I just say that out loud? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to, Is there a cafeteria or something similar here? He asked, looking into her eyes. There is. In that case, could we go there? Marietta should have been heading home, where coffee, chocolates, and her romance novel awaited. So why did she agree to have coffee, eat pastries, and talk with this man? But the choice was made. Once they sat at a table, Samuel apologized again and asked her to explain the rules once more. No problem, he said. I'll send someone to bring flowers without fragrance, and as for the fruits? Natalia loves them and eats them all the time. Don't worry, she definitely won't have an allergic reaction. All right, you can sort out the food situation with her. My job is just to warn you, Marietta said. So, you're the uncle of the twins? So we have twins? Fantastic. But that's happened in our family before. And you're not married? I don't see a ring on your finger. But, you know, with the way things are these days, relationships without marriage and all that. I'm not married, Marietta blurted out, then blushed deeply. What did this irresistible Fernandez number 2 think he was doing? Let's not discuss my personal life, please, she tried to be strict again. Why not? He squinted, like a predator sizing up its prey. Because it makes me uncomfortable. But if it makes you so uncomfortable, why did you agree to have coffee with me? You could have just explained the rules down there. Because it's simply inappropriate to ask something like that right away, she replied. All right, Samuel nodded. So after which date is it appropriate to ask? Let's start today if your evening is free so we don't waste any time. Listen, Marietta had never felt so strange in her life. You're already scaring me. You didn't know me for 5 minutes and you've already started flirting. A silence fell between them. Fine, I'm willing to admit that I rushed things, from your perspective, but from mine, I was just taking the first step when I met an attractive woman. Oh, stop it, she waved him off. I'm not wearing a bit of makeup. I've just finished a full shift. I'm exhausted, my feet are killing me. Are you telling me you like me just the way I am? Marietta suddenly felt unusually bold. In that case, take me home and don't call me until the day after tomorrow. And then, if you haven't changed your mind. Who knows, maybe you're just acting strange because you're on an emotional high from becoming an uncle. Anyway, if you don't change your mind, then I'll agree to go on a date with you. All right, he nodded simply, then stood up and offered her his hand. Let's do it your way. I like that you have your own principles and desires. That's just wonderful. Well, how nice, Marietta thought and yawned. This approach suited her just fine too, and anyway, she didn't really believe that the somewhat eccentric, Yet admittedly magnetically charming brother of the husband of one of the maternity ward's patients would call her in a couple of days, but out of courtesy, she gave him her number. Leonardo had very little time left before his vacation. He just needed to appear at the hospital a couple more times to sort out some things, and then it would be wait for me, white sandy beach and gentle ocean waves. He was heading to Bali. Leonardo Ramirez, a familiar voice called out. Damn it! Just when he was in a good mood, Laura approached him. What do you want? Ramirez turned to her, unfriendly. I'm busy and in a hurry, so make it quick. I'm sorry, it's about my mother. You gave me the last bottle on credit. Thank you, you are our savior, but we can't pay you back right now. Leonardo, can you wait a little for the payment? And can we have more of the medicine? You'll be on vacation, and my mother. Oh yes, Leonardo had made another mistake in his usual, calculated, logical behavior. He had given the medicine on credit because Laura had begged him, practically pleaded. And he had done it. What a fool. And right now, the realization of his own weakness hit him like the last grain of sand that caused everything to collapse. When is your mother finally going to die? Leonardo shouted right in the girl's face. I'm so sick of all of you. Do you think she really needs that medicine? Are you scrambling to find money to pay for it? Ready to give your last penny? Well, you're a fool. Leonardo, what are you saying? Laura murmured, whispering as she backed away from him until she hit the wall with her back. How can you, Leonardo? She asked in a trembling voice. Why? What do you mean? I don't understand. But Leonardo was hardly thinking straight anymore. He was just venting. He was pouring out everything he had bottled up onto Laura. And in a matter of minutes, she learned that the medicine her mother had been taking for so long was nothing but a placebo, made from the most ordinary extracts of simple plants. Ramirez was breathing heavily. He felt somewhat relieved, and at the same time, a tsunami of realization hit him. He had just confessed to fraud. It was fortunate he hadn't blurted out everything, but what he had said was enough to cause him trouble. With a habitual gesture, he grabbed Laura by the collar of her coat, pulling her close, and grabbing her hair with his free hand, he hissed, staring into her tear-filled eyes. Don't you dare tell anyone. Got it? If I find out, it'll be the end of both you and your mother. Do you understand? I understand. It hurts. I understand. Please, let go. Good girl, Leonardo smirked cynically. All right, I'm off on vacation. Where to? Somewhere you'll never go in your life, you poor fool. And you know what? If I were given the choice between spending my vacation with you or a great white shark, do you know who I'd choose? The shark, and with that, he stormed out of the office, slamming the door loudly. Laura had never been a strong or decisive person. She was more of a timid and cautious type, who would rather live through a bad day in peace than take risks. If she had remained like that, after Ramirez's threats, she would have just cried it out and then gone back to work, silently burying her pain, fear, and disappointment deep inside. But after his words about how he had deceived her and her mother, something broke inside Laura. Laura? Marietta was surprised when she saw her subordinate. Are you all right? Did something happen? She asked, reading the expression on the girl's face fairly accurately. Yes, something happened, Laura nodded. Tell me, do you have Pablo Fernandez's phone number? I think he's the only one who can help me. Leonardo had been looking forward to this vacation for a long time, savoring it in anticipation. But why did he feel so sick? And indifferent to everything around him after the long flight? He kept replaying everything that had happened to him lately over and over in his mind. It was like a streak of bad luck in his life. When his smartphone rang and an unknown number appeared on the screen, Leonardo felt a chill run down his spine. It was a bad omen. He could have just ignored the call, but he answered it. Leonardo, Pablo Fernandez's voice came from the other side. You again? Leonardo snapped. What do you want from me? You know what, I'm on vacation, so. Leonardo. Something in the tone of his former school adversary stopped Leonardo from ending the call and throwing his smartphone at the wall. Leonardo, listen, I know everything. Even before he explained, Leonardo understood what it was about, and then Pablo briefly and clearly told him that just yesterday, Laura had approached him and relayed the contents of their conversation. She also informed Natalia about it. Yes, Laura found out that Pablo's wife was involved in that journalistic investigation and quickly put two and two together. Leonardo, Pablo continued. His former classmate, whom he sincerely wanted to support, was silent now, but Pablo knew he was listening intently. Leonardo, so Natalia's colleague, he's a journalist too, found the homeless man you were working with, the one who was your courier. So it looks like everyone is about to find out about you, and I'm not just talking about the press, but also about the angry relatives of the people you deceived. Do you understand, Leonardo? I don't know why you started all this, and maybe I'm a fool for saying this, but for some reason, I feel like you're not entirely a bad person. I want to help you, Leonardo. When you come back, I'll pay for a good lawyer for you. Do you hear me? There's still a chance to fix things, at least partially. Leonardo, you are listening to me, right? I'm listening, Leonardo Ramirez responded in a colorless voice. You. Why did you decide to warn me? Because I don't want you to end up completely alone. That would be wrong, even for someone like you. There was something good, something bright in you, call it what you will, but you're not pure evil, Leonardo. Funny, Ramirez smirked, and it's nice when someone believes in you. Thank you for the warning. I'll be going. Where? First, I'll get drunk, and then I'll think. Leonardo wasn't joking. Yes, he had felt a strong aversion to alcohol all his life, but now he suddenly saw it as his only salvation. Get drunk, forget, escape from problems for a while. Fortunately, the hotel where he was staying had a bar where they served him. They served him and served him again, without asking unnecessary questions, and then, when the alcohol no longer went down, Leonardo decided to go to the beach. After all, wasn't that why he came here? The beach was crowded and noisy. Leonardo, staggering, made his way to the water. The waves licked his toes, then his ankles, his knees. The sea was warm, like fresh milk, and seemed so inviting. He barely had to swim, the waves carried him. Wow, how far he had accidentally swum, thought Leonardo. However, he continued, I'm a decent swimmer, so getting back to shore shouldn't be a problem, especially with such company. Hey, dolphin, hello. Ramirez drunkenly shouted, seeing a triangular fin in the water and splashing his hands. Hey, dolphin, do you want to be my friend? Am I really so worthless, such a scoundrel, a fraud, that retribution awaits me? Who cares? I don't care about anything anymore. Leonardo slowly paddled towards the shore. The sea creature with the fin accompanied him, then disappeared from sight for a while, splashing somewhere to the side, and then returned to him again. Why, Leonardo thought, is everyone on the shore suddenly fussing and running around? Why are people rushing out of the water? Are they scared of the dolphin? He laughed. The scorching sun and alcohol clouded his mind, and his body was not responding well. Suddenly, Ramirez froze. He was barely staying afloat, but he simply couldn't make himself move because he suddenly realized that the creature next to him was not a dolphin at all, but a great white shark. People on the shore were shouting, waving their hands, lifeguards, ordinary people. Leonardo's hazy consciousness realized that they seemed to be calling him to swim back, to save himself, but he couldn't move. He was so scared and, at the same time, somehow curious, is it true what they say, that sharks can be so big that they can bite through a person like a straw? Apparently, this was an outstanding specimen. Leonardo swallowed hard. Maybe it won't attack? Surely not all sharks are dangerous and perpetually hungry predators? And after all, Leonardo thought, Things couldn't possibly be so bad, so awful in his life that, on top of all his troubles, a shark would attack him as well. That would just be fantasy. Then, at some point, the fin disappeared from view again, and then something under the water seemed to nudge him once more, and then, with all its might, jerked him down into the depths of the sea. People on the shore screamed, running around more frantically than before. Leonardo wanted to scream, but only flailed his arms and suddenly lost consciousness. He lost it before the shark attacked him again. Girls, Margarita peeked into the ward. She was preparing to be discharged and was now actively walking back and forth, beaming with joy, but returned to the room pale and trembling. "Have you heard the news?" "Our head doctor." "What news?" asked the ever-curious Lucia. "A shark attacked him while he was on vacation at the sea, and that's it," Margarita blurted out, turning even paler. "What? Completely?" Lucia gasped. "How terrible. I heard that Leonardo Ramirez was such a professional, I thought maybe I could consult with him." What a stroke of bad luck. It's unbelievable. It wasn't just her who found it hard to believe what had happened. When Laura found out about it, she had a breakdown. She was very lucky that there were caring people nearby. Marietta and Samuel Fernandez didn't leave her alone in such a state, they helped her get home. By the way, Samuel Fernandez, like his brother, after they found out that Laura had been a victim of Ramirez, offered her their support, or more precisely, said they would help her mother get all the necessary tests and treatment. And they kept their word. Though it was hard for Laura to believe in this kindness at first. Just like that? Could it be possible? But it was true. And soon, by the way, Laura's mother started to recover. It turned out that many of her illnesses were quite treatable. The main thing was to tackle them comprehensively and not leave the body untreated for an extended period. Meanwhile, at the maternity hospital, news was spreading, rumors and gossip were flying. After all, such a respected person as the head doctor turned out to be not only a sophisticated and heartless fraud, but also the victim of a shark attack in the waters of a popular resort. Many people shook their heads, saying that this was the law of karma at work. The scoundrel got what he deserved for profiting from people's misfortune. Natalia with her twins, Margarita with her baby, and Lucia, who had given birth to a daughter. They all not only managed to become somewhat close while they were in the same ward, but also continued to keep in touch after being discharged and eventually became friends with each other's families. Marietta sometimes felt that she was more affected by Ramirez's fate than anyone else. No, they were never friends, but she admired him as a professional. It was very difficult for her to accept the fact that one person could harbor two such opposite sides of a personality, a talented doctor and a soulless fraud. Marietta didn't tell anyone about this, but after Ramirez was buried, she visited his grave a couple of times and left flowers there, and somehow, this made her feel a little better. "Is it you again?" Marietta said when, after her shift at the maternity hospital, she once again found the car parked in the lot. It was Samuel's car, and Fernandez himself was there too. "I've told you," Marietta said, trying to sound stern, "you don't need to drive me every time. I can perfectly well get home on public transport. I'm an independent person." "I have no doubt about that," the man replied with his usual annoyingly charming smile, "but you can consider this as doing me a favor, if that makes it easier for you." "I don't know," Marietta said, stopping to nervously adjust the strap of her bag on her shoulder. "I don't know anything. You're confusing me completely." She really was very confused lately, and it wasn't about the former head doctor, but about this man in front of her. Marietta was already in her 30s. Her parents were still together, but she had always felt, had always known, that there was no real love between them, that they stayed together simply because it was convenient, beneficial, and familiar, and also because they wanted to raise their daughter in a complete family. And more than anything, Marietta was afraid of repeating this scenario for herself, a relationship for the sake of appearances, just going through the motions. She understood that it was foolish to hope for some kind of whirlwind romance. After all, Marietta told herself 1,000 times, not everyone in the world has to meet such a love in their life. But her heart ached and longed for intense emotions, and despite all the rational arguments in her head, dreams kept spinning. And then he appeared in her life, a man she so easily wanted to believe in, but the thing was, Marietta was afraid of making a mistake. After all, she could ruin everything, and her orderly, neat, and measured life would go to pieces. So she decided it was time to make a final decision. And probably, yes, probably today, she should tell Fernandez that she wasn't ready for all this, that he should find someone else who wants all those romantic gestures, those passionate declarations, and other oddities of love. She just couldn't afford to take such a risk. But first, Marietta thought, for this conversation to happen, it's better to get in the car rather than stand in the yard. Besides, it looks like it's about to rain. On the way, Samuel suggested stopping at a cafe, but Marietta refused. No way. She wouldn't let herself be distracted from her serious mood. And she started to speak. Words flowed out of her in a rapid stream, forming thoughts that reflected her fears, hopes, worries, and other concerns. "And that's it?" Fernandez finally asked. The car came to a stop. They had arrived and were parked outside the building where Marietta's studio apartment, for which she was paying a mortgage, was located. "You're just afraid of making a mistake?" "Just?" Marietta turned to him indignantly. "So, in your opinion, that's not a valid reason? The fact that I don't want to ruin my life? And has it ever occurred to you that you might be ruining it by denying yourself this?" Samuel's voice had a growling note, his eyes flashed, and reaching out to her, he grabbed Marietta's hand, squeezing her fingers tightly but gently. "And maybe we should move on to a first-name basis? Marietta, we need to decide something because I can't go on like this anymore. I need a final answer here and now." She gasped for breath. This was what she had wanted so much, to settle everything. But why was it now so hard to say the no she had rehearsed 1,000 times and to give up the chance for happiness with this man? Why, at the thought of it, did she have an instinctive feeling that she was about to make the biggest mistake of her life? She repeated. Samuel didn't wait for her to finally say something. He just silenced her with a kiss, a searing kiss, full of desire to claim her and never let go. And the kiss lasted until they both ran out of air. "And now you can speak, and I swear I'll accept whatever answer you give." Marietta opened her eyes, her head was spinning, and her heart was beating so lightly, the heaviness of anxiety lifted. "All right," she replied, I want to try. Even if I might be making a mistake. How long I've waited for this." Fernandez rolled his eyes, then pulled her into his warm, gentle embrace. "It feels like it's been since the moment we first met," he whispered in her ear. "I'll never believe that you could have fallen in love with me when I was all disheveled and tired from a shift," Marietta laughed quietly. And then they had the whole evening to talk. And the whole night, and the whole morning. And ahead of them, they were sure, was a whole life to share together. "By the way, did I tell you about Laura?" Samuel said over breakfast. "No, how is she?" "I know she's at a spa with her mother," Marietta replied. "Yes. Did anyone ever tell you that your pancakes are out of this world? Stop talking nonsense. So, what's going on with Laura?" It turned out that Pablo had assigned one of his personal assistants to take care of Laura and her mother all this time, and unexpectedly, a romance blossomed between this man and Laura, and now they were planning to get married. "I think it's time for us to do the same," Samuel suddenly said. And before Marietta could realize what he was talking about, there was a red box with a ring right under her nose. "Oh," she said. "Is that your answer?" Samuel raised an eyebrow. "Be quiet, please," Marietta froze with her hand over the ring. "I need to think." "And for how long?" Samuel asked plaintively. "Oh, fine, okay, I agree. Happy now? You ruined the whole romantic moment. Maybe I wanted you to persuade me a bit more." "Well, actually, I didn't, I love you so much." She threw her arms around his neck. That morning, naturally, All they could talk about was the upcoming wedding and their future married life. My brother and I share similar views. We both respect family traditions, Samuel said. That's good, Marietta responded. Except for the one where children are born at home on the Fernandez family bed. What's wrong with that? I think it's the perfect place for our son to be born. Why do you think the first one will be a son? Because I really want it to be. You're such a brat and a selfish one at that, Marietta laughed and playfully tapped Samuel on the nose. No, our children will be born in a normal place. I'm thinking the very maternity hospital where I work. What do you say? We have a great staff and modern facilities. Well, if that's what you want, then so be it, Fernandez replied.
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe to the channel.